Prehistoric Dilton Marsh. There is an abundance of evidence showing prehistoric activity in and around Wiltshire, from the Paleolithic right through to the Iron Age, from stone circles, long barrows, henges, cemeteries and hill forts.
Wiltshire is especially rich in prehistoric archaeology. It's partly to do with the chalk, which is a very light, easily tilled soil, so very attractive to early farmers. But you've also got other contrasts in geology, like the Vale of Pewsey, and you could argue that Dilton's right at the western end of the Vale of Pewsey, and that acts as a communication route from east to west. And then the rivers such as the Wylye and the Avon give further access through. So it's very easy to access a wide range of landscapes, light soils, and we see this reflected with the monuments, starting with Neolithic long barrows, causewayed enclosures. There's a particularly fine long barrow inside Bratton Castle, clearly visible from Dilton Marsh. Later on we've got an Iron Age hill fort. Between the Neolithic and the Iron Age, we have a profusion of Bronze Age funerary monuments, the so-called round barrows.
The earliest prehistoric evidence we have close to Dilton Marsh would seem to have been in the south of the parish and at Old Dilton. Here we find evidence of late Neolithic and early Bronze Age activity, seen from a possible round barrow near Old Dilton, where up to 8 disarticulated skeletons were discovered.
The most obvious monuments we still see from the Bronze Age are the round barrows. These are the burial mounds. They are the successors to the Neolithic long barrows. The long barrows are communal tombs, multiple burials. But from about 2500 BC, the beginning of the Bronze Age, we see a move to the burials of individuals between large circular mounds. These can take a variety of forms. They're all circular, but some are called bowl barrows, disc barrows, bell barrows, all dependent on their profile. But each mound contains an initial primary burial, usually a flexed burial, a body, a skeleton, accompanied by grave goods. This can often include bronze tools and weapons, sometimes objects of gold, and pottery vessels and amber and exotic materials, suggesting that these are quite high-status individuals. But as we go through the Bronze Age, we see an increasing move to cremation, often in flat cemeteries, often adjacent to the round barrows. By the time we get to the end of the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age, about 800 BC, there's clearly a major change in the way that people dispose of the dead. We have very, very few formal cemeteries from the Iron Age. You might find occasional burials of individuals in a pit within a hill fort or a farm, but more often all you're finding are pieces of chewed bone, gnarled bone. And it may be that the dominant rite of disposure in the Iron Age was exposure of the dead, to be defleshed. It's only at the very end of the Iron Age, from the 1st century BC, that we start to see formal cemeteries again.
In 1937, in the garden of No. 4 Dilton Cottages, a Bronze Age looped palstave bronze axe was found. This was an early type of axe, common in the Middle Bronze Age in northern, western and southwestern Europe.
And of course from Dilton Marsh we do have a piece of Bronze Age metalwork, which is an object called a looped palstave. In effect, it's like a small axe head, but it has a cast loop through which thongs would have been bound to help tie the axe head into a wooden haft. We often call these axe heads, and they probably perform a multitude of woodworking functions, from lopping down small trees, but probably also used like an adze for trimming wood as well. But they're relatively common finds and indicate a level of sophistication in both bronze technology and also, by implication, how important wood was to the local economies.
Further evidence can be seen near Chalcot House, where a Bronze Age banded bucket urn was unearthed, inverted over a cremation, along with Bronze Age pottery close to Hissomley.
We have this frustratingly fleeting reference to a find from Chalkett House, which is described as a Bronze Age banded bucket. I think this can mean one of two things. One possibility is that it's a pottery vessel, a type called a bucket urn, which is a very large Middle Bronze Age type of pot dating from about 1600 down to about 1000 BC. The other possibility is that it actually is referring to strips of bronze that could have bound a wooden vessel, and things like this are known from the late Bronze Age, from about 1000 BC down to 700 BC. Bucket urns are often found in a funerary context, often containing cremated bones. So if it's one of those, then it might indicate a Middle Bronze Age cemetery. If it's an actual bronze-bound wooden vessel of later Bronze Age date, then that would be something of much higher status that could be associated with eating and feasting.
Iron Age pottery shards found by field walkers to the south of Fairwood Farm, along with pottery found close to Dilton Farm, may suggest a possible settlement nearby.
We do have Iron Age pottery from Dilton Marsh, and this could indicate a settlement of that date. And as we get into the Iron Age, we start to see an improvement in pottery making technology. We see a much wider variety of different shapes and forms, and we're starting to see much clearer evidence for more long-distance contacts based on the pottery, because one can identify the sources of the pottery from the clay. So, for instance, in the early Iron Age, there's very distinctive red burnished ware that comes from the Salisbury area. As we get towards the end of the Iron Age, we are even starting to see imported pottery coming in from northern France. And of course, by the middle of the 1st century BC, we see the introduction from the continent of the potter's wheel.
From the archaeological evidence, we can clearly say that prehistoric people were living and working around the area of Dilton long before the Roman invasion of Britain.
From the 1st century BC, we also start to see Roman pottery appearing. And this predates the conquest by 150 years, but we're seeing more and more trade, especially in prestige items. We've got amphora that contain wine from Italy, and we start to see fine Gaulish, that's French, and Italian tablewares coming in. So it shows that people are now tying in to the whole Mediterranean world. And you could argue this is part of the early Romanisation of many of the Iron Age peoples of southern Britain prior to the invasion of AD 43.